colonialism of the 60s, the struggle with regards to Algeria?
יכול להיות. Yes.
Just have sort of a question on this. So, understand Levinas is sort of modern reading, and I would want to sort of side with him, like, what right do we have? But the spies get killed, right? So, it's like their side.
Yeah, God doesn't agree. God doesn't agree with
Right, right. So it's you know.
But what we're doing.
But so Levinas, in a way, doesn't have a, you know.
Well, Levinas will answer us. But so far, I mean, I live here. I clearly think we have a right to the land. It's quite a powerful point. What, someone lives here already. What basis do you have to come in and throw them out?
Well, as Rashi says, God, why do we start this Torah with?
I'm very glad you brought up Rashi. The famous Rashi. I always get a bit worried when I say famous Rashi because I think half the people don't know, and then they feel anyway. The first Rashi on the Torah.
If you know it, it must be famous.
Right. Yes.
Well, I know it.
Rashi, best known for the first Rashi on the Torah. They go as follows: Bereshit bara Elohim, in the beginning God created the world. Why doesn't, Rashi asks, in the name of his father, why doesn't the Torah start with the first mitzvah? Chodesh hazeh lachem, all about Rosh Chodesh. At stake, I think, is what is the Torah? Is the Torah solely about mitzvot, or is the Torah also narrative? What's the answer? Because one day, I'm still surprised no one uses this, maybe Baiti or Didu, no one uses this in negotiations. One day, the people of the nations will come and say, you are thieves, you are robbers, you stole the land. And what will we say? Bereshit bara Elohim. In the beginning, God created the world. God can choose who he gives everything to. And if he wanted to give it to the Canaanites and then take it from them and give it to us, that is completely within his rights. Therefore, we are not robbers. Interestingly, Rav Shach, who I don't normally quote in Shirim, one of the former leaders of the Haredi movement, has a very interesting take on that. I think he's right. It's very dangerous Russian. Because just as God owns everything. So just as God can take Canaan from the Canaanites and give it to us, he could also, if we don't behave ourselves, take it from us and give it to someone else. Actually, that Rashi doesn't prove that the land belongs to us. What that Rashi suggests is that if you want to live in this land, you need to behave in a particular way. And this is where Levinas answers. The willingness, we're told, before we even get the land, we're told that we're going to be exiled from it. In fact, at the Brit Ben Abitarim, in the Covenant of the Pieces, one of those things is like, better just to keep it in Hebrew. It's like, what are tefillin? Phylacteries. I still don't know what it is. At the Brit Ben Abitarim, God says to Moshe, God says to Avram, you will inherit the land. Avram says, how do I know that I will inherit? He says, go outside. And he shows him the exiles. We are told about exiles, at the same time we're told about going into the land. And what Levinas says is, by what right, what's the answer? By what right do we have to go into this land? Only our willingness for exile allows us to enter. The date of the exile is set even before the first conquest. Only someone who accepts upon himself that there is a chance that they will be exiled has the right to go into the land.
Why?
Because he doesn't think
It's
it's
a land on condition. It's a land. We get the land on condition.
Exactly, it's not for granted.
If you conquer it and if you come and feel that this is your property,
It's not for granted.
then it's not Hashem's property. Because if you enter the land, you conquer the land knowing that you could be expelled from it, because it's not your land.
So it's not inevitable that you're going to be expelled.
Sorry?
It's not
It's
inevitable.
not well, nowadays it's not inevitable that we. But I don't.
But it
the
shouldn't be
other way.
inevitable. It shouldn't be inevitable back then either, because then you get into questions of free will. And
Okay, free will for another sugar and schmooze.
Right.
But there's something inherently connected with. I get the land once I have accepted that I may be exiled from the land. And rather than emphasising it's not inevitable that you'll be exiled, I'd rather change around. Say, it's not inevitable that we will stay here. And I'm not sure that mainstream thought today focuses on that. It's a very scary idea, but I think it's very, very accurate. We have the right to be here by accepting that we won't necessarily stay if the society we create is not up to standards. So what have we done? We've basically had a political back and forth. By what right do we have to go in? Morality. Morality is not going to work. By what right do we have to go in? Spiritual, whatever. It doesn't matter. The indigenous people's right is stronger than God's. Okay, so by what right do we have to go in? What's the bottom line? By accepting that exile might happen to us, that then gives us the right to go in.
How does that solve the moral problem? We go in thinking, okay, we're here temporarily, and we've still got people to deal with. How do we deal with them? What?
Okay, fine.
Listen, let's put it this way.
Well, I think it's brilliant, but there's a bit of a non sequitur here.
Yeah.
In other words, the spy's second to last statement is stronger on some level than his.
You know, you could ask even a basic question.
You're an
Why
anti-Zionist.
I'm not.
No,
You can ask a more basic question. I think that's more Chadami. It's Hebrew. Why do we need sovereignty? Why does a nation need sovereignty? I mean, why do you have to basically be a sovereign of a piece of land?
I don't think that's a question that he's asking. That's a question outside the framework of the dialogue that's being had here. The assumption here.
The assumption is that they basically said the assumption is that a nation has to have sovereignty over.
Maybe not has to have, but that it's a higher.
Okay, then the Chadam says basically that we don't necessarily have it.
Okay,
Spiritually sovereignty. Okay, I mean the whole basis of let's say the what you call the Baita Yehudi, the what's it called?
Jewish home.
The Jewish homeland, and not being a sovereign. I think that you could even have a more basic question like that. Why does Levinas take into consideration that he basically wants the sovereignty of a land?
But what I was saying is that the last point, Ki chazaku mimeno, is stronger than Levinas's answer, which is if you are a people that accepts the fact of exile, that then gives you the right.
Unless that is actually an answer. In other words, if when you walk in and you say, this house is not mine by my right, it's mine because God
chose to give it to me.
God is the source of morality. God is saying you can stay here only if you behave in a certain way, and I'm aware of that every single day that I'm here. Then I have a different perspective on dealing with the people. And I think also just want to add one more thing, which is that the word perspective seems to pop up. In other words, that funny notion where they say, and we were like grasshoppers and with them, and also they saw us that way. That's all about perspective. They saw themselves as grasshoppers, and they said the other people saw us as grasshoppers, and that was the wrong perspective. In other words, what you've got when you've got in your mind as you enter is the most important thing for you to learn in that, and it seems to be a bit of a thread running through the story as well.
Right,
Yes.
this whole leader.
Sorry, please.
It's interesting. You see this whole leadership play going on here. So you see what you're talking about right there with the self-perception, that whole thing about the having a growth mindset, and then here is the risk-taking element as well, which all is about leadership in many ways. And so this generation, they had to be the natural-born leaders, the risk-takers, the people with that growth, people had a positive.
Perfect. Yeah.
Does Levinas do this a lot? I mean, what he's interpreting this text got nothing to do with what the verses say. Has he got a whole running thing of using text to justify a great doubt about Zionism he personally shared? Is that his standard view? I just don't know when you do.
This is taken from something called 9 Talmudic Readings, which is him giving lectures, kind of a bit like what the book says, on 9 Talmudic readings, which I've read, didn't fully understand, but I don't think that the political aspect of Zionism is brought in any of the others.
Did he, and was he...
I think he would self-define himself as a Zionist. But we might have to Wikipedia.
already in the early 60s by what was going on in Israel on that day?
I don't know. What I like is that the last point he gives is on the side of the 2 spies rather than on the side of the 10 spies. But the other thing I like, both about this and about Jonathan Sachs, is it makes the 10 spies, okay, we get it. okay, you had like a fixed mindset, like that's really unfortunate, but it wasn't really your fault. Or here, okay, you had these really strong opinions. We're not going with you, but there's some sort of internal logic that explains why, rather than they were just really terrible people who wanted to rebel against God.
So they had a logic, but announcing their logic, which was basically saying, Hashem doesn't have the right to take us into this land and do this, doing that in public was a bad move.
Maybe.
Maybe they should have gone and spoken to Moshe
Well,
privately.
that
and said,
point gets rejected, but I think it still does have, whether we agree with it or not, it still has some sort of internal logic to it. Yes, Joe.
I think there's still a problem that we're overlooking, which is the last point that the 10 spies make is Chazaka Mimeno, or whatever the phraseology is that no, the right of the indigenous people to live there is stronger than God's will. Why? That's just a statement they're making, and coming from Levinas's perspective of awareness of the other, okay, so for him that's true. But there's no support for that whatsoever. God is God. God is the Almighty, and so just because they're the indigenous people doesn't mean that their argument holds any water.
Of course, if you look at the people's rules, I mean, one of them is the Amalekites, who they've already beaten in battle, and who God has commanded to, you know, this is, it's not Muvan Me'elav, it's not inevitable that the indigenous people are going to be slaughtered or driven out, because there are certain peoples who...
Because they fight well.
No, there are certain peoples, if I'm not mistaken, who are actually allowed to live, stay in the land and aren't driven out.
When they pretend they're not from the land, then we allow them.
No, well, depending on who you ask, no?
I think, and we can kind of maybe reinterpret it because we're in the 21st century, but we're supposed to wipe them all out. The Gibeonites,
yeah.
they kind of, this is a complete aside, but they basically leave the land, come back, make out that they've travelled from miles away, and then we're like, okay, you can stay, and then later it turns out that actually we're supposed to wipe them out.
Could it be that the interpretation of Chazak Minenu can refer to the strength of the morality of strength and power against the morality of spiritual strength and power? So in other words, our spiritual strength cannot overcome the physical, ethical strength that exists in the land, and therefore we will never succeed. In other words, we are strong spiritually, but their strength is more powerful, or their drive is more powerful. Or
but if that's the case, how strong were they really spiritually?
So
that's the case, how strong were they really spiritually? Very strong spiritually, because they were living a life of spirituality in the desert. Well, so they were spiritually very, very powerful. However, they perhaps lacked the strength, the physical strength to look after. No, to look after. No, I don't think so. I think that they couldn't have not have emunah, because they were led, they were being taken after, they were in contact with Hashem all the time. So I think that what they didn't know is they didn't know how to live life, because the real life.
Well,
and
so
so
they were taken care of completely.
Yes, exactly.
From the minute they left, they
exactly.
didn't have to make any
So here they see that the strength.
Hashem even more.
So the strength of the people who actually know how to take care of themselves is greater than the people perhaps who might have spiritual strength but don't know how to live life in the real world.
Well, I just want to wrap it up because it's getting a bit late. I wanted to bring 3 alternative readings to a story that most of us know very, very well because we grew up on it. A Zionistic reading that turns the Mapilim into these kind of tragic heroes, a psychological reading that explains why 10 spies would, at the first challenge, get worried, and a political reading that brings a very interesting back and forth that you can probably hear at a lot of campuses in the West today. That says, by what right do we have to go in? I don't think we necessarily need to agree with them. I don't necessarily think we need to identify with them. But for me, it's fascinating that the kind of classic story that we always told in a particular way. It has many, many other angles to it. So we wanted to bring a kind of a conversation between very modern ideas, psychology, Zionism. Some people say Zionism is 2,000 years old, but let's assume it's the 19th century nationalist ideology, and text. and takes it know very well. So I hope that it was interesting, and
Thank you.
that's
Sarah for again hosting. Does actually work. Thank Clive once again for an amazing shiur as usual. Reminder that not only is Shiur and Shmooze, it's totally voluntary. People give of their time and they give of their houses and they keep wood and everything. So don't forget to give money for tzedakah because of that. Second of all, anybody who wants to be added to the list, Facebook or email, whatever, speak to me. And I'm sure there was another thing, but I can't remember what it was. So, yes, if anybody has any ideas for future speakers, also come to me and speak to me. I'm Nadia. Have a good evening and schmooze away.